Welcome to Community Conversations. This past school year, our school district revised the secondary school math pathways as a result of data showing that early acceleration by skipping content was creating knowledge gaps for students. Our Mathematics Curriculum Council was studying the issue and revising the pathways prior to the adoption of the California Common Core Math Standards. The Common Core Math Standards shifted content to provide greater exploration of a foundation for algebra concepts in the middle school grades. Here today to talk about some of the changes are some of the district's mathematics experts who've really been studying this issue. I want to welcome Mr. James Maxwell, our Director of Secondary Instructional Services, Ms. Peta Gay Robinson, Secondary Mathematics Coach, Edie Burbeck, a mathematics teacher in our school district who works at a junior high level, Nathana Ayalo, who is an assistant principal at Washington High School, and finally Sue Lemke, who's our administrator in the district office over mathematics and science. So let's begin the conversation today really talking about what's changed in our district and why.
Well, basically, there are a few things that have changed. One of the things that was happening for a select group of students is that we were skipping content, early content, foundational content, and we were allowing these students to take geometry in 8th grade. That has changed as California basically adopted the same plan that the rest of the country has, which is that algebra is fundamentally a high school freshman algebra course, and that accelerated students would take algebra in high school. What we've learned, as you said, Dr. Morris, is that in looking at our own school data, our students, there were large numbers of our students who were not doing as well as we would have predicted in their junior and senior year with that skipping. And that is actually something that I've seen in multiple districts over the course of my career. I've seen many math teachers complain that some of these super accelerated kids have not done so well. And so we try to create pathways that are aligned with what is now called the Common Core or California standards in particular. And we've tried to align them so that our students, a greater number of our students, are going to be better prepared to succeed in STEM coursework in college. Because for us, it's not a race to get there. For us as mathematics educators, what's really important is that they thoroughly know the math, can conceptually understand it, and apply it later on in life. And because once they leave us, we don't have any power to change that. So we wanted to make sure that we followed what we fundamentally believe, which is building up the foundation so that it can succeed later on.
So we said in the introduction, the Math Council, and can somebody talk a little bit about what the Math Council is? It sounds like this mysterious group of mathematicians, but it really is, in a real practical way, what's our Math Council that really was looking at this data, and what did they discover in looking at how students were performing?
Well, our Math Council is actually some of the hardest working teachers I've ever met. It consists of a representative from every single junior high and high school. So we have at least 11 teachers at every meeting, myself as the administrative facilitator, and we also have the advantage of having our math coach, Peta Gay, and then Sue, who is our math and science program manager. And we've met at least once a month for the last 3 years with me, and before I became the facilitator with Vin Lamb, and we have been looking at what is best for our students. It has been a conversation that has gone on well past the designated times for most evenings, because these educators feel like they really want to make sure they understand exactly how this is going to affect all of our students and the ways that we can best present the material so that they can get it right the first time.
So can I add, just
Please.
the Math Council has been meeting for the last, I'm sure since they've been there, but I've been a part of that for 8+ years, and just knowing that pathways have always been things that districts deal with, but the acceleration pathway still exists in Common Core. I think it's important to understand that Common Core was occurring, but we were looking at how we were qualifying students, what exactly the criteria was going to be for those students to be accelerated. And so that's a totally separate issue from Common Core. It's not because of Common Core that we're doing things. It's the idea that we wanted students to be properly placed in classrooms so that they can own the math, they can do the math, so that they continue to excel. What we found over time, and it started back, there was a board presentation in May of 2013 where we had Amy Kwan, who was also leading the council at that point in time with Mr. Maxwell, made the presentation with the data that the students that were hyper-accelerated were not necessarily those achievers when they got to their high school years. And so it's important to know that we've been looking at this, I've been looking at it for 8 years on the council. So when the students now that are coming into 7th grade, we were probably looking at this when they were in 1st grade. We wanted to make sure that we're best placing those students. And so those two issues of what we're looking at for Common Core pathways and criteria for acceleration are different, even though those pathways, they have a place for acceleration in them. Us looking at the criteria came well before the adoption of Common Core.
So what's changed in the pathway for a student in a real practical level? How does it look different in the classroom? Because I think one of the issues we talked about at the beginning is really wanting to help students have conceptual knowledge of the math so that they can be successful in the future. How has that changed in what we're doing now?
Well, Common Core is looking at the practice standards where students really need to not have to box their answer. In mathematics, a lot of times all they wanted to do is either know the algorithm, memorize the algorithm to get to a point where they're boxing their answer. And Common Core and businesses and colleges are saying that's not what's good for people that are going to be leaders in their field. You need to be able to know what the answer means and what would happen under different types of circumstances. So what's happening in the classroom takes longer, it takes more ownership, it takes more depth, it takes student-to-student interaction, and a lot of times when the students are just between 11 and 13 years old, a lot of that is a maturity, is a maturity thing. They need to be able to understand what the math means, and they also need to be able to question each other's logic or lack thereof, be able to support instances where something might accelerate or change, and that really isn't what was happening in the classroom before. It was more learning the algorithms, getting through, more of a pat way to look at it. And mathematics in the classroom isn't that way anymore. There's just so much more of an experience that has to go on in just creating the environment where they can actually learn at a deeper level.
And for our math pathways in Fremont, it starts in 6th grade and it's Common Core 1, then 7th grade is Common Core 2, 8th grade is Common Core 3. Those are really foundational algebra concepts are taught in those years, and so students are getting a much deeper conceptual understanding in the middle school grades that prepare them for the success in higher mathematics. What we were seeing in the data showed that students who were skipping those early classes didn't own the algebra, and so they were struggling when they got to AP Calculus. They were not performing, they weren't getting 4s and 5s on the AP Calculus tests, and it was largely based on algebra concepts that they were struggling with. So our accelerated pathways create a compaction of the courses. So in 7th grade they get 2 years or 1.5 years of math, and 8th grade they get another 1.5. So it's 3 years compacted into 2. That's different than what we were doing in the past where they were skipping content in order to get to those accelerated classes. And when we look at the data that Edie's referring to that Amy Kwan presented, we had about 20 to 30% of our juniors who were in AP Calculus in 2011, 2012, 2013 who did not get 4s and 5s on the AP Calculus test. And for seniors those years, 2011, 12, and 13, 20 to 30% of those students got at least 1 C or 1 D in their high school mathematics classes. And that the Math Council is saying that's due to, and these teachers are saying that's due to these gaps in their foundational algebra. And that leads to another point with our math pathways with the courses. We think that sometimes parents are confused about the actual content of the courses. They're thinking we're pulling the students back and slowing them down, when really the algebra concepts from 8th grade algebra, 6 out of 8 of the chapters that they were learning before are now being taught in 8th grade. So we're looking at possibly renaming the courses to reflect that content.
And so your idea is there may be some misconception because the title of the course doesn't really reflect, because as a parent, right, my goal is I want my child to get into a good college. And if there's something called acceleration, how would you advise a parent who says, I want my child accelerated because that's the way to get into a good college?
Well, I would say that I think there is a lot of there's a lot of vocabulary out there that we really do need to work on communicating with our parents, and just calling something Common Core 3 doesn't give them a hint. And one of the things that in talking with various parents, including board members, is when you look at internationally, most countries don't teach just here's algebra for 1 year and here's geometry for 1 year. And the United States has traditionally said it's just a year of this course and a year of the next course. Well, now we're actually doing it more like all the other countries are. 8th grade is still focused on algebra. 75% of that is foundational algebra, but then the other 25%, probability and statistics and geometry.
Right.
So we're making sure that the students are actually being exposed to these concepts earlier. And then when they move into high school algebra, although the focus is still algebra, you again have more probability and statistics and more geometry. And I think most of us, if you look at a report card and it says algebra, you don't realize students are actually being exposed to these other concepts year after year after year, although they're not the same concepts they learned in the previous grade. And so the difference between the newer accelerated compacted program and what we used to refer to as the honors program is students really have to be able to pick things up more quickly. They really are doing 3 years in 2. Whereas honors traditionally was more depth. Well, now we want everyone to have that depth. Every child should have access to the real beauty of mathematics. And so, if a student can actually pick something up with just a single explanation, fabulous. Then you're ready to go on that accelerated pathway. But if you're like most of us, where you need a little more practice, then absolutely, you should stick with our standard pathway and you will still be extremely well prepared to go to a 4-year college.
And I think that's an important point and I just want Mr. Maxwell to talk about some of the conversations he's had and experience in that, because how can we provide that reassurance for parents that if your child follows the mathematics sequence, they're going to be okay, and
Right.
really let parents know these foundational skills and the real deep conceptual understanding is what young people need to be successful in their career, in that good college and in their career.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Morris. One of the things that we emphasize as educators is we want them to be successful when they get to college. And I know I hear from a lot of parents, and I'm a parent of a high school kid, and we want them to get into the college. They often say get into a good college, and I say, well, what's a bad college? I mean, this is America. We're blessed with thousands and thousands of colleges, and you can be successful no matter which college you graduate from. What we're interested in is making sure the students are successful when they get into these colleges. And our concern that we saw mirrored in the upper division classes of super accelerated kids was not what we would have liked. And our job is to get them prepared. We're still providing pathways for very large number of students to get into calculus as seniors and juniors, AP calculus in specific. And so those things, do help you get into the more elite colleges, but taking them in the junior, the senior year, either one of those is fine. We are actually predicting that with this pathway that we've developed, our prediction is we're actually going to have more kids taking AP calculus in the junior year, and we believe more kids will be successful on the test based on the fundamentals we're doing. But the overalls, we're looking at all of our kids in math and making sure all of them have those options, because our country needs more STEM graduates. We know that. And so we're trying to do the fundamental things that can get them there. The other part that's important to note is some parents have erroneously thought that not being an AP calculus as a junior robs you out of getting into the higher order, the AP science classes. And That's absolutely not true. The highest requirement is AP Physics C. And even in that one, it simply says you must be at minimum concurrent in calculus, not AP calculus, concurrent in calculus. So you would have to take pre-calculus as a junior. And so we provide plenty of opportunities for students to get there. And we just thoroughly believe in, I just also want to mention when we talk about the Curriculum Council that each one of those members represents all the math teachers back on their site. And all of these conversations that have led to these decisions were discussed with teachers at the site, and there's a consensus for everything that we're doing all across the 100 or so secondary math teachers. And I have to say I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I feel fortunate to have been part of this movement, and I think our kids are going to be better off for it.
Well, the foundation really for building a deep understanding of mathematics begins in kindergarten, right? I mean, we
Yes.
know. Can somebody comment on what's happening at the elementary school level? Because you have a different situation. At the secondary level, you have single subject teachers who are teaching math, who love mathematics. And at the elementary school level, you have a multiple subject teacher who teaches mathematics and history and science and social science and art and music and physical education and every other subject. What are the implications for what happens at the elementary school level to make sure students are prepared? And as a district, how are we working across the system to make sure that there's coordination and communication?
Well, I know all our elementary school teachers are working very hard on making sure they provide opportunities for their students to talk with each other, be able to challenge each other's reasoning and understanding, be able to express the way they understand the math as they see it. So they're not just learning algorithm, they're learning to develop problem-solving strategies as they move up. So throughout the years, by the time they get to junior high and in high school, they will be able to be free in their expression and know that I can challenge your understanding of what you say and be solid in the way they present their information. And that's what we'd want all our students to be able to do. And previously, that's not what was happening. So by the time they get to junior high, you ask a student to explain their understanding and, well, I got the answer. And it's like, but that doesn't tell me how you got it or what your thought process was. And being in the elementary schools, I've visited some of the classrooms, and you're able to talk to the students, and they will tell you how they thought about it and what they're doing with it. And so hopefully the students that are coming up now, by the time they get to ED in junior high or up at Washington in high school, will still be able to do that, so that when they go off to college and out in the workforce, they'll be productive in the groups that they're working with and are able to problem solve and all the other things that the companies and colleges are saying that they don't see previously with the kids coming up.
And I think you're right. If there is so that to being able to communicate the mathematical idea was only brought the question up. I was observing the most incredible math teacher today, who happened to be the principal at Patterson Elementary in a kindergarten classroom. And this discussion among kindergarten students about this is the 34th day of school, what does that mean, 34? Right. And the sophisticated language these 5-year-olds were using and the expectation. And so I think when we talk about really having that foundation in place in order to be successful in the future, it really goes across the system. For parents into the future, what are the things that a parent should be doing now to be able to understand and support their child in the math pathways, in being successful in what our expectations are of young people?
Well, for one thing, if they're wondering, they have questions about the math pathways or questions that we haven't addressed here, on the Fremont Unified webpage, we have a FAQ for a lot of the topics that parents have raised concerns about. I think that they should be having fun with their kids in math, that strengthens their understanding of math and problem solving with that. That can make kids enjoy math and science and those types of topics more, and that can only help them. I'm sure you guys have more to add to that.
I would say that, realizing that doing math is actually a creative pursuit. And one of the things that I went to a professional development last year, and it was almost like a contest. How many different ways can you find this? And that I think, parents, a lot of us were, taught in this is the method you do, as opposed to how many different methods can you utilize, and the fact that it's great to think outside the box. As long as you can express yourself, which is why being able to use appropriate vocabulary is really becoming vital.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I just, piggyback on that. When a student makes a mistake, it should be a yes. We get to look into this. Where was your thought processes? What were you doing wrong? So we want to celebrate those, because that's when the synapses are ripe to make those just talking with other people to see exactly what was your thinking, what was your misthinking, and can it lead to something else. So I think too, it's okay for students to make mistakes. I think the biggest thing they can do is analyze their errors, look to see why they were doing what they were doing and what they were really thinking about, and how that applies. I think that what's happening in the classroom now, people need to understand, really the colleges were also they were the ones, College Board, all these people were about the idea that the students were not prepared for college how they would want them prepared. And so I did go to workshops, and with SVMI, which is in Silicon Valley, the high school, the college professors were saying, no, we need to slow this down. Students need to look at structure. And so it's not Fremont Unified is making these pathways. It's not Common Core is making these pathways. This came because it was organic, because this is what's happening. They're looking at a lens that says now what we're seeing at the college level is not what we want. And so really, we've been looking at it. We know it's supposed to be different. And also the colleges, it's like everything is happening at a perfect time. So we want to make sure that we're getting this preparation for students so that they are college and career ready. Those are the words that are just chiming in. And they do. They need to know how to slow down, and they need to think, not just go on to the next problem that's the same problem. Because parents also at home are looking at saying, why are you only giving my student 6 problems to do? Well, the 6 problems they need to do well, and they're more thought problems than they are just algorithm box your answer problems.
If I just want to reinforce the point you made, because as educators for years and years and years, we've heard and seen the statistics on the number of students who graduate from a high school and have to take remedial courses at the college level. And I think your message that we would want to deliver to parents is that really is something we're trying to resolve. And we know the way to solve that problem is to really build a foundation so that students not just can come up with an answer, but also can think and understand and analyze why they got the right answer or why they got an incorrect answer.
I wanted to add too that what we really want is for it to be a good match for the kids in their mathematic placement. And that's the message that should be coming from parents as well, that we want this to be a good match so they like math, so they do well in math, and they maybe developmentally they can get into the accelerated pathway later on, but it should be right where the kid feels right, a good match where they're not stressed out, where they're learning, and that makes them enjoy their math, versus if we're pushing them too hard and they're in the accelerated pathway and they aren't doing well, they're not going to enjoy their math, they're not going to like it, they're not going to want to go on into higher math.
And we know that as teachers. We know that if they're not enjoying their math and science class, if they're just being pushed and are struggling to make it, that's not on their list for majors in college. They have to really be having the ability to feel like, hey, I can do this and I can master this and I'm successful, to think of that kind of STEM career. They're not going to do it because mom or dad says this is a good idea. They may start out in college that way, but they're going to, if they're not really being successful, they're going to drop out. And I meet with college people and they tell me one of the biggest, first of all, we're at the highest dropout rate in college in our history. We have many kids that aren't making it. I think they get there and then they don't know what to do. And I think part of our goal, again, as you've just said, is to help them become successful when they get there. And you have to like your subject, and you have to be able to kind of do what Edie was saying. Look at a mistake or an error or a bad test as a challenge, and like, I can do this and I can figure out how to do that. If you don't have that, you're going to quit. You're not going to go into those fields.
Attitude
Yeah.
is huge. Attitude is everything. And it's very important that these kids are able to thrive and they're able to have multiple representations for something that at other points in time we were only seeing one way. And that way, when they see a math possibility, they can actually start thinking, wait, didn't we do something that looked like this somewhere else? So it's all about training the brain also to think differently, and that's starting at the
elementary level. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so if a parent felt that their child wasn't currently being challenged, I know our first answer would be go and talk with your child's teacher. How would that conversation go? And as a teacher, how can we help parents to understand ways to challenge their children no matter what math course they're taking?
I would think that hopefully that the teacher would have sets of problems, a problem of the week, something that's going on that's more complicated. So it would be a place for a student or a group of students to also go in and say, wow, why don't we think about this? Why don't we decide, how many things of corn can they make, or how can they maximize? So I would hope that when a parent went in to talk to a teacher, that a teacher would say, hey, where I'm trying to do problems of the week, I'm doing a cluster group on Thursdays for a half an hour during the period, so that those students can get some individualization that's happening, so that they can have more of an opportunity if they happen to be at a level where they are thriving and they want more, that they're put in an environment where they can actually practice those skills more so to get them up to the next level if that's really where they're headed. I think that we also want students, we want them to be excited about math. We have to provide them opportunities to be challenged, because math can be seen, like Nathaniel said, as a game, as something that's how many ways can you do this. So we want to keep the excitement level there for kids. I think that's very important, and you're absolutely right. You should go to your teacher if you think that's not happening, because I think that should continue to happen. And if it does, we're in a prime environment for everybody to be successful and to be owning the math, and going forward so much more charge, because the attitude's going to be there. They're going to have can-do ways, and they have to have that attitude that they can do math. Math is just not something that's turning pages, because it's been that way for a while.
And the reverse of that, the parent who would say, homework time is tears time every night because the work is too difficult for my child. What's the advice we would give as teachers to that parent? We tell them, go talk with the teacher, and then...
Well, we don't want the child to feel that way, first of all, because if you continually feel defeated, and there's no a matter of going to any tutoring center or coming after school or going to interventions after school that's ever going to recapture for you that that feeling of I can succeed in this area. So I think it's critically important for the parent to be very positive with the child. Very, very positive. You can do this. We all learn by our mistakes. Let's go to the teacher and find out where you've made your mistake and how we can fix this. Remember, all great people fail many, many times. And that's how they learn and be better. So it's that resilience that you have to help build in your kid, and that's that positive parenting about how you can do that. And I very much work with the teacher in terms of that.
We talked a little bit at the beginning about the Mathematics Council and the work that they had done to date. What's the current next steps? How are we monitoring how this is going to figure out what happens next, and how do we move forward?
So we're looking at some students who might have been right on the border of being in the accelerated pathway, maybe looking at other access points for them to the first identification is at 7th grade, the next one is not until 10th grade. And so looking at, do some students just develop a little bit later? Is there a way for them to get into that accelerated pathway if that's where they should be? The other thing we're looking at is for students who really want to get to that AP Calculus or Calculus as seniors who are not in an accelerated pathway, that if they wanted to take an extra elective for math, that would allow them to get there. So the Curriculum Council is really looking at are all the students' needs being met, and just reflecting on it, how's it working, and so forth.
We love data, we're math teachers.
Yes.
So the idea to continue to look, and that's something that we've been doing for at least 5 years, is just looking at data. So we used to have CST scores, and now we will have SBAC testing, not breaking down, whether or not they got a 2, 3, or 4, but exactly what that means, and see how we can work to support students better, but we always have to be out there for the data to make sure placement is going to be correct. So we're always doing the best we can at that point in time, but we continue to take in data to reflect, to make sure that we're fine-tuning things as we go so that we're meeting those needs. Like you said, at both levels, the students who are struggling as well as the students that are headed for college, as well as those that are hyper-accelerated, that's what they're doing, that it's best for all of those students.
And I think that you have heard the feedback that this is from teachers all around, that this has been the best placement year, particularly in algebra as freshmen. I think you can speak to that.
It's one of those things where I feel like the Math Council is one of the best professional learning communities I've ever been a part of. Because the teachers are so reflective, they really look at things from all perspectives, and every year we're checking in to say, so how do you think this placement data went for our 7th graders? How did this work out at the first quarter? What are our grades looking like? Are we seeing students that are struggling that we didn't expect to be struggling, or are we seeing kids being super successful? What kinds of interventions do we need to put in place? Do we need a double block at the high school? Do we need to move the double block to the junior high? How are we going to make sure that we capture all of our students before they become sort of disenchanted with mathematics?
And I think really the final summary is we have teachers from across all of our secondary schools who really are the mathematics experts, who care passionately about math, who want to make sure, as you said, students who are struggling are successful, students who need acceleration have the acceleration that they need, but it really is developing that lifelong love of mathematics and the language of mathematics and playing with mathematics and seeing how math is a part of the real world we live in every day that really helps set students up for success in the future. And with that, I am going to thank all of you for a great conversation from Community Conversations. I thank you, and I really thank our mathematics team who came together to talk about what's happening in mathematics and how we're doing our best to meet the needs of students.